In Mark 1:23, we're going to meet the preparatory use of there and also a Semitic idiom reflected in the Greek. Kai euthus ein inte synagoge auton anthropos in pneumati akatharto kai anekraxen legon. And now here we have this euthus again, which is generally translated in first-year grammars as immediately. But do you think that contextually immediately works? So Jesus had just gone into the synagogue, and he was teaching them as one with authority, not like the scribes. And then immediately, well, immediately what? I mean, you just had a summary statement, and there's no way to tie immediately into any kind of temporal sense. It's interesting to look at all the translations and what they say. Suddenly, or just then. In other words, the idea is there he was. It's not that it was immediately following some other event. It happened quickly, right then. And then here's this, what we call the preparatory use of there. In other words, when you see ein, instead of just saying was, you can say there was, T-H-E-R-E. Now, there was, turns out the subject is anthropos, so it basically saying a man was in their synagogue. But you could also say there was in their synagogue a man, if you wanted to. But anyway, sometimes the ein is just translated as there was. And there was a man, and the man was in a spirit unclean. And there's a note in the graded reader that this is a Semitism. It's interesting that Luke has echon, a man having an unclean spirit. In other words, he's cleaning up a Semitism because he's writing to a Greek audience. But anyway, we just say with an unclean spirit, who was possessed by an unclean spirit, who had an unclean spirit, something like that. And he cried out, kind of an unusual word, but it's anakradzo, so it's just a straight aorist. He cried out, and then I included legon in verse 24, just because it was kind of awkward to put it in our discussion of verse 24. But he cried out saying, and again, we've seen enough of these, I think, that this is just standard Greek that we don't need it in English. He cried out, comma, and then what he cried out at. But it's very common to have an indicative and a participle following it. He cried out and said, he cried out saying, something along those lines. So this is a little tricky to phrase, but what you want to do is keep ein and anthropos together if you can. But there's no easy way to do that. I would guess we could say, and immediately there's your temporal connection. There was a man in their synagogue, prepositional phrases on their own line. He had an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying. So we can indent this because it modifies that. So the idea was there was someone, and he cried out, saying.